Hey, how's it going, guys? Mr. Boss for the win here, and in today's Grand Theft Auto 5 video, we're going to be talking about, is the Coil Cyclone worth $2 million, and 10 things you need to know before you end up purchasing this vehicle. So let's get started with the price here. That's obviously going to be our barrier to entry, and the Cyclone is a relatively expensive vehicle and expensive supercar. So it's available on the Legendary Motorsports site for $1.89 million, but by the time you're done customizing and upgrading this vehicle, you're likely going to find yourself about $2.3 million deep, at least over $2 million on this vehicle. So it is relatively expensive. So that's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know, if you haven't already figured out by now, the Coil Cyclone is a fully electric supercar, which is really cool. So this car is based off of the Rimac Concept 1. I'm sure many of you guys watched the Grand Tour, which features the Top Gear guys, and they actually feature this car on one of their upcoming episodes. One of the hosts on the show, Richard Hammond, he actually almost killed himself driving this car, which is pretty crazy. So I don't know if that has to do with the actual handling of the car itself, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but I think that is kind of interesting that they're going to be driving that vehicle and then it's going to be introduced into online as well. So obviously, because this car is electric, that means there's going to be a few unique quirks about this vehicle. Number one, when you're driving this vehicle, it's almost completely silent, which is incredibly weird. So you're so used to getting into cars that make lots of rumbles and noises. The only thing you're going to hear when driving the Coil Cyclone is, number one, other vehicles, players, and NPCs. Number two, the brakes. And number three, the suspension. And you might actually hear the transmission switching, but there's not going to be any physical rumbling noise because there is no gasoline engine in this vehicle, which is very interesting. Now, I definitely think this is going to be something that players will have to get used to, and it might actually turn some people off from this car. I actually think it's rather unique, especially when you're driving amongst other supercars or other vehicles like in races. So you'll hear these other engines roaring, and then you'll just hear your little car driving by and it's as quiet as a mouse, which is really funny. Now, because this is an electric car, you're also going to notice that there will be two changes inside the Los Santos custom shop, or rather you will have two fewer options in terms of upgrading this vehicle. The first of which will be transmission, because there's obviously no gasoline engine, and number two will be turbo. There's no turbocharger that you can upgrade on this vehicle. So those are the two things that will be lacking from the custom shop. Don't worry, your LSC is not broken, your office garage is not broken. It's just this vehicle does not have either of those options, transmission or turbo. Now let's get on to some of the customization that is pretty unique, and let's start with the liveries. So the liveries are pretty cool. However, I do have one gripe with them, and that is some of the colors, in fact, almost all of the colors, aside from black, do not match the paint jobs that you can apply to this vehicle. So I don't know why Rockstar does this, but it drives me crazy. Whenever they add liveries into the game, they make them colors that can't be applied or can't be matched from the ones that we can select in game. So that's incredibly frustrating. So for example, one of the whites in this doesn't match any of the whites that you can apply to the vehicle. So it offsets a little bit. So in my opinion, that's a little bit frustrating, but the liveries for the most part are pretty cool if you can get around that. That's just my OCD kicking in, but if you can, like I said, get past that, you'll probably enjoy them. Another thing that people might find frustrating about this vehicle is there's a lot of carbon fiber by default. So there's actually a diffuser on the back of the car that's carbon fiber. You can't remove it. The mirrors are carbon fiber. The door sills are carbon fiber as well. These are options that you cannot change or remove. I wish Rockstar would have given us the option. Now, this car does look great with all that carbon fiber, but some people may not like that preference and may want to remove it. And in this case, you cannot. So definitely keep that in mind. Again, this car has a lot of carbon fiber, and it also has a lot of things that you cannot remove either, like that back diffuser, which a lot of people may not like and may ultimately alter your decision on whether purchasing this vehicle. Another thing that's interesting about the Coil Cyclone is the secondary color and the livery and the effects they have on sort of the electric engine back there. So your primary color is pretty simple. It's pretty much the entire body of the car. However, the secondary color has a couple of things that it also changes. Number one is the brake calipers, which is kind of cool because then you can sort of mix and match colors to get a little bit of a nicer touch. But also it will change like the tubing and piping in the back engine, which is really cool. So the liveries will also change this as well. So you can kind of mix and match and get some cool combinations. If you make like your secondary color black, for example, and then your livery is red, sort of the piping and tubing in the engine will be black and red. It looks really awesome. So that's something you might not have known about. And on top of that, one thing you should probably do is not change the window tint on this car because it affects the giant glass back as well. And if you make it dark enough, you won't be able to see the really cool engine in the back there, which obviously is a nice part of this car. It's very unique. So doing that will make sure you kind of diminish that in terms of not being able to see it. So I would definitely not do that. Another thing about this car that's a little bit weird in my opinion is the license plate. So it almost looks like it's shrunk or compacted. And this is the same thing that happened on the Ocelot Ardent. It's kind of like the license plate got crunched a little bit when compared to other cars. Now, I'm not sure if this is appropriate based off of the real life Rimac Concept One's, license plate, but it looks a little bit weird in my opinion, and I'm not a huge fan of it. So that might be something that doesn't bother you. It might be something that does, but at the end of the day, it does have kind of an interesting license plate. Now, one thing I did notice about the Coil Cyclone is it does seem to get stuck on curbs rather easily, especially when you apply one of the front splitters on there. So I was having this trouble many times throughout the day, whether it was just going up on curbs or trying to go up on a bump. My car would literally get stuck, and I was wondering why. And it was the splitter. And if you take the splitter off, you won't have this issue, but it does look nice and it's a cool customization option. But just know if you do this, if you have the splitter on there, and I didn't even have the suspension lowered, you will get stuck on low objects and curbs, which is a little bit unfortunate. Now, after all that, we need to talk about the performance of this vehicle because after all, at the end of the day, you've just spent likely $2.2 to $2.3 million on this vehicle. You want to know how it performs. So let's go over the details and the highlights of that. So number one, this thing is going to be the drag race king as it's one of the fastest accelerating vehicles in the game. We did a couple just, unofficial drag tests at the airport just for fun on my live stream earlier today. And this thing smokes the acceleration of the top supercars in the game. Outside of probably the rocket thruster ones, there was a Vigilante racing with us. And that thing, obviously, when it takes off, it takes off. But this thing has unbelievable acceleration. But unfortunately, that's where the pros about this vehicle really end up stopping. The top speed is not all that great, as we found out in some of the other drag tests where, we increased our length a little bit and those other supercars would start to catch up, if not pass us at the end. But also the braking, traction, and handling are all really terrible on this car. I noticed I would spin out incredibly easily. I would not have control around tight turns. And even though this car doesn't have amazing top speed, when you go from max velocity to try and brake, it takes a long time, which is not all that great. So that's why I said the Coil Cyclone is basically going to be the new drag race king, because that's all it's pretty much going to excel at in terms of performance and racing. Really, any track or any stunt race or any sort of circuit that you're going on here, there's going to be better vehicles than the Coil Cyclone, unless it's literally just a straightaway. But then again, its top speed is going to give way to other vehicles eventually, like the 811 or the Nero Custom or the T20. So that's definitely the biggest warning for the Coil Cyclone is the fact that, yes, it's incredibly fast off the start, and that might be very deceiving to a lot of players. They might only use it in short sprints in the city or in, various races where there's a lot of straightaways and think to themselves, wow, this vehicle is, the end all be all. It's so fast, but it really has a lot of shortcomings. And that's something you need to be aware about before buying this vehicle. Now, when we compare it to some of the other electric or hybrid cars in the game, like the Voltic or the Chameleon, or even something like the Surge and the Diligente, it is by far the best electric vehicle in the game, but it should be that way, and there should be no reason why it isn't. If you compare it to something like the Voltic's price or the Chameleon's price, it's nearly 18 times more expensive. So yeah, it better be much better than those two vehicles. So does it take the crown as the best non-rocket thruster electric vehicle in the game? But all in all, I don't really think that's something that's all that great to write home about, because when you compare it to the other vehicles in its class, the other supercars, it just doesn't stack up at all. Now, a couple other people in my chat were talking about this earlier. Would the Concept One, the Cyclone, be better as a sports car? I'm thinking it might actually be. Now, the Voltic is a supercar, the Chameleon is a sports car, but it seems as if this vehicle would have at least been better performance-wise as a sports car. Maybe it would have fit in a little bit better, it would have been a little bit more competitive, but as of right now, this vehicle is not to be used in races unless it's a drag race. That's really the only thing you're going to be winning with the Coil Cyclone. But anyways, that's all the information I've got for you guys in this video today. Bottom line, is the Coil Cyclone worth $2 million? Well, that depends on what you want it for. Is it a cool novelty electric car? Yeah, and it's a lot of fun to drive around. But if you're serious about using this in races, I'd probably pass over it, as there's cheaper options and certainly much better performing options too. But like I said, that's all the information I've got for you guys in this video today. Hopefully you did enjoy. Let me know what you think about the Coil Cyclone in the comments section down below. I'd love to hear from you guys down there. Don't forget, I've got a shark card giveaway going on right now on my Twitter account. I'll leave a link to that in the description, so if you want to get involved, you can. If you did go and enjoy this video, though, a like rating would of course be awesome. And also subscribe to my YouTube channel if you are new or you like daily GTA 5 videos like this. With all the way, guys, like I said, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you guys in the next video.